Hey, what's going on, guys? RedBeard here from the Warrior Tribe. It's September 5th. Kids just went back to school. The weather's starting to go cool, cold nights, not so hot days. It's flipping my mentality. Time to get into some different cooking, cool weather cooking, as I like to call it. It's kind of my favorite thing. It's my favorite type of food to eat. It's certainly my favorite kind of food to cook. Today, I'm going to take this opportunity to show you guys, for those of you who don't know, how to make a good, proper, beautiful Irish stew. Irish stew, beef stew, they're all pretty much the same. Some stews don't have potatoes in them. Some have lots of different root vegetables. Today I'm going to be using some of my own grown carrots, celery, onion, some fresh garlic. The beef I'm going to be using is a bottom blade. That is a very nice tough cut that's riddled with fat, connective tissue. If you were to slice this up, throw it on the grill, it'd be terrible. You'd be chewing on it all day. But when you take something like this and you give it the time it needs, say in a crock pot or in a stew or just in the oven for a nice low and slow, or even long and slow on the grill, you know, if you take 2, 3, 4 hours, break down all that fat and connective tissue, you get a really tender, flavorful cut of beef. So that's what I'm going to use today. I'm going to take the blade, cut it all up into chunks, and show you how to make stew, at least the way I make it. Stay tuned, we'll show you how it's done, guys. Alright guys, so the first thing we want to start with here is a nice piece of blade. Let's take this piece of string off that they use to tie it up, because I'm not cooking it like a roast. So as you can see, it's very kind of lots of connective tissue, lots of nice inner marbling, nice fat. That's what makes a good rich stew. While I'm doing that, I've got my pot over there heating up with a bit of rendered down duck fat. You can use any fat, but if you use a nice animal fat, you're going to get a nicer animal flavor. So, yeah. So all you got to do at this point, while that's getting warmed up, is decide how big of pieces you want in your stew. Some people like it small, some people like big chunks. You know, it's all completely up to you. I generally go with something like, well, let's see here. Best way to get into this guy. Well, we'll just take a chunk off right now, just to give an idea. So for a chunk like that, and they break down, so bear in mind that it's going to break down. I go with big chunks, about that size. Maybe 1.5 inches squared, thereabouts. Take that in half like that. You know, pieces about that big. And then they end up with something about half that size when it's done, which is about, you know, half a spoon. You know, something you can get a piece on the spoon with maybe a little bit of extra vegetable, bit of broth, whatever. So I'll cut up all the beef, we'll get it in the pot, and we'll start putting some color on it. So we went in with a little bit of the, turn this light off, it's kind of a bad color, there we go. Went in with some of the meat. I've got half of it there, half of it in here. The reason, not to say talk loud over the popping and sizzling of this searing, we don't want to go in with all the meat, because what happens when you crowd it, you end up with a very cold pan, basically. It steals all the heat, and then you get gray meat. You don't get a nice brown. The browning is going to lock that meat up and force the liquid to have to fight its way through, which is going to make for a tenderization of tough meat. And also, all that browning is going to give you that nice dark brown in your gravy, in your stew broth. It's also going to give you that big, beefy, yummy flavor. And we don't just brown the meat, we brown the vegetables, we brown everything. You know, the onions and carrots have lots of sugar. Anytime you see browning, either on meat or vegetables, that's sugar that's caramelizing. And when you get caramelization, that's flavor country, as I like to call it. So I'll continue browning up this meat, getting some color on it, and once we have that all done, we'll move on to the next step. Smells good. This is a little side note, guys. I wanted to tell you that when you go to the grocery store, a lot of time you can buy stewing beef, and you'll notice it doesn't have often all this nice marbling. It's usually quite red. Usually what that is they're using some of the hip, outside round, inside round, bits of scrap here and there. And it's fine, it will make good stew. and it will break down tender, but not nearly as tender as blade. Blade, by far, in my opinion, is the best meat for stewing and braising. You're going to get that beefy, rich flavor from this. You won't get that from the, that very red, lean-looking stewing beef. You want that nice marbling like that. That's fantastic. That's what you want, and that's what blade brings you. Okay, so that's what you want to look for. And if you can't find it all chopped up, ready to go that way, then just buy a blade roast. Bottom blade, top blade, whatever. Doesn't matter. It's all good. Chop it up, make your stew. So as you can see over all the beautiful steam here, we're picking up some really nice color on the pieces. Nothing's really sticking because this is a pretty great pan. But if you do get sticking, don't worry about it. Just scrape at it. It all adds to the flavor. You can deglaze it with some red wine or some broth. But we'll get a little bit more color on this, then we'll add in some onion. And then start putting some color on that. And just keep stacking flavors. Sounds good. Smells good. Alright guys, so the next thing we want to do is get our onions cut. And then we'll get those fired up into the pot. Just remove the pot for a minute there because it's getting a little bit toasty. Which is okay. That's extra color, extra flavor. I don't have a whole onion to use. Well, I do, but this is left over from last night, so I'm going to use this. But if you can imagine, this is half of an onion that's been peeled, and the two top and bottoms have been taken off, and that's how I always like to cut my onion. So once you have the top and the bottom cut off, and you cut your onion in half lengthwise, then you basically, to do a dice, you basically want to cut across the arc of the onion the thickness of the chunk you want. So, if you wanted to do a small dice, you'd do lots of little lines this way, holding it all together, and then turn it all, and then the other way. And onions, because of the way they're layered, will naturally fall apart into a small dice. But for a stew, I want a nice big chunk because it's going to cook a long time, and I want it to stay together and not turn to absolute mush right away. So for this size of onion, which is a pretty large, big Spanish onion, I'm only going to cut it right in half. Just straight down the middle like that. And I want almost like 1 inch square chunks thereabouts, so I'll just cut it here, and here, and here, and back there, and maybe over there. And that, as you see, nice uniform shape, size, and they go right in the pot. Boom. Alright, and just finish up this piece as well. Do the same way, even though it's already half chunked. Okay. Nice, even size. And then we'll start putting some color and flavor on those as well. While I'm getting some color on the onions here, I took an opportunity to jump outside and grab up some fresh herbs from the garden to add into the stew. We have here some fresh thyme, sage, small amount, and some Italian flat leaf parsley. This one here really is that real kind of quintessential stewy, beefy yumminess. It's got a nice, piney, earthy, strong taste. It's beautiful. Love it. So we'll use that with a different blend of a few spices, which I'll show you in a bit, and that'll be sort of the flavor base to go with the stew. Picking up some really good color. Like, for example, this onion here isn't actually caramelized. That's just, sauce that's getting off the meat. It's beautifully rich, and we haven't done anything really but brown the meat and a bit of the onion. So we know right off the hop here, this is going to have some nice, deep, rich flavor and color, and that's what we want. There's nothing worse than a stew that looks sort of pale and gray, and the meat looks sort of steamed. It's not a nice thing. So I'll continue cooking this down a little bit more, get a little bit more color on those onions, and we'll toss some fresh chopped garlic in there as well. So I'm going to add about 5 good size, these are pretty hefty, cloves of garlic. So I'm not going to really mince them really necessarily. I'm just going to give them a bit of a smash and a rough chop. Okay. So to do that, take a few aside, put my knife, if you have a knife this size, just going to set it on top. I'm going to smack it because I might accidentally slice my hand. I'll just put my hand there and just give it a good push. That breaks the garlic down and leaves it flat so you can chop it a little easier. It's a little bit more uniform. And I just run my knife through it up and down this way, maybe this way if you want. That gives you a kind of a rough chop, coarse garlic. Again, everything that's going in here is going to be in for a while. stewing away, so you want it to be a little bit big. So I'll carry on, get that garlic in there, and then we'll go ahead and get some liquid in there and start the braising process. Alright, so now that we've got some nice color on the meat, on the beef, and the onions, and the garlic is in there, everything's smelling real good, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to toss in my fresh thyme. You could take the time, take the time, that's a good joke. I have thyme on my hands. A million jokes with thyme, by the way. Time flies. Anyways, stupid jokes. Forgive me. You don't have to spend any time pulling it off the stem. You could throw it right in there, and right near the end of the cooking process, you'll see all those sticks in there. All the leaves will have fallen off, which is good, and you can pull the sticks out, and it's real easy, and that's what I do. So I just throw that right in like that. I happen to have here some basic chicken stock. Water is fine to use, but if you have broth, use that. It's always better to stack flavors than just use bland water. Water takes away, it doesn't add. So I'm going to go in with this. As you see, this has a gelatinized texture. That comes from the gelatin that is found in bones and meat. And so when you make a good real broth, that's a testament to a good quality broth, is that gelatin. And when it melts and you eat it, that gives you that rich mouthfeel, a rich stew we'll have, or a rich sauce we'll have. So in that we'll go. Kind of just like so. Scrape that out. It's kind of like chicken jello. So now that's a perfect amount of liquid in there to start my braise. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of an idea here as to what we've got. So as you can see, we've picked up a really nice starting color without using any sort of bouillons or bovrils, whatever you want to call them, you know, concentrated, salty little stock pucks, which, you know, I use them. Sometimes I need them. But if you can get a nice bit of color on there, you get a natural, nice dark color. You don't have to use all that stuff that's full of salt and sodiums and MSG, you know. But those things sometimes do come in handy if you need the flavor. So I'm going to bring this up to a boil, and then once it's up to a boil, turn it right down to a low simmer, put the lid on, and that will do for the braise. That will take a couple hours, break that meat down, make it super tender. So as you can see, we're up to a gentle boil now. Take that down to a simmer, which is usually about as low as your stove will go. At this point, I'll add a bit of fresh ground pepper, black peppercorns, if you have it. If you don't have fresh, you could add the dry stuff, you know, out of your shaker. But I'll be honest, that stuff doesn't have a lot of flavor. If you like that flavor of sort of stale pepper, well, then use stale pepper. But fresh pepper has a much fruitier, bolder taste, so I like to use that. And I like to use lots of it, although I have to watch because my daughter gets a little bit, oh, it's spicy. Pepper is a little bit spicy for those who don't like any heat at all. To me, I don't taste the spice in pepper, I just taste that beautiful flavor. So now that I've got it at a stewing, braising simmer, I'm going to put the lid on it and leave it alone. We'll give it a couple hours to soften up, get that nice breakdown in the meat, the sauce will richen up, everything will cook down. And we'll move on to the next step, which will be cutting up our root vegetables, which you can either just add right in, or what I like to do is fire up the oven, nice and hot, toss them in a little bit of fat, and roast them, get a little color on them in the oven, and just add them in right at the last minute so that you don't have mush for vegetables. I like a good tiny bit of crunch left in my vegetable when I'm eating it. When we come back to check this out, it'll be a beautiful braised beef texture, and I'll show you what that looks like. So at this point, I've taken the root vegetables, so carrot, and this is turnip, or rutabaga. This is the bigger, waxier one. It's got a nice flavor. If you don't put turnip in your stew, or you don't like turnip, try roasting it. It's actually really good. I grew up not liking the mashed turnip that you have at Thanksgiving and Christmas and all that, and I was like, gross. But roasting it really brings out its natural sweetnesses, gets this nice kind of chewy coating on it, and it goes really good in the beef stew. So what I'll do, now that I got these all kind of cut up, lightly tossed in a bit of oil, I'll roast them in the oven at a nice high heat, 450, and get some nice color on them, get them cooking and caramelizing. And once that's done, I can add them into the stew once I thicken that up. So we're at the point now where the meat is as tender as I'd like it to be, and I'll show you how that's going to look. So we take a big chunk out. As you can see, without any sort of force at all, just comes right apart, just like a pot roast. You can see the fibers of the meat. It's very tender. You don't want to keep cooking it past this point, otherwise you're going to find that your chunks of meat are going to turn into basically like shreds of meat in your stew, which is okay, but you know, if you want to have that nice big bite of beef, stop at this point. Now's the time to do some thickening if you want to do that, and you can add in the root vegetables. Alright guys, so while I got the root vegetables in the oven doing their thing, roasting up and getting some color on them, I brought the stew back up to a pretty full boil because I'm going to take this opportunity and thicken it up a little bit. There's a couple different ways you can do it. Today I'm going to do it with a flour slurry, it's called. So it's just some flour and water I've mixed together, made it sort of thick, almost the consistency that you want the stew to be, a little bit maybe thinner than that. It is important if you use flour to strain it after you mix it up, get all the lumps out, otherwise you'll end up with some little dumplings, and that's kind of gross. If you want to use cornstarch, you can. It's a little easier to work with, but you don't get as nice of a end product. You get a little bit of more of a shiny, glazy type stew rather than a more rich gravy looking stew. There is another way to use a roux, which is equal parts fat and flour. It's a little bit more complex, and I figured for the sake of ease, we'll just go with the slurry. I have a lot of success with it. I like a slurry. So what I want to do is I want to mix in this slurry into the stew while it's rapidly boiling, and I want to make sure I really mix it up well as it's going. And I don't want to add it all in one big dump. I want to sort of slowly work it in and make sure that it gets tightened up to the right consistency that I want it to be. So I'll do that now. Start a little bit at a time, see what kind of consistency it gives me. You can always add more, but once it's so thick, then it's a whole different ball game to try to fix. And everybody likes their stew different thicknesses, so you do it the way you like. I'm going to bring it out to about there. It'll look thicker at first, and it will sort of loosen up again as it cooks down a bit more. And once you've added all that in, you want to give that some time to cook, because if you go ahead and eat that right away, it's going to taste kind of like raw flour. So you want to cook that for at least 5 more minutes, sort of at a low simmer, so you don't burn it, and that'll allow that flour to cook out and not taste all dusty in your mouth. So at this point, once I get the root veg roasted up, I'll toss them in, and I think I might even add in a few frozen peas, kind of finish it off, and yeah, should do it. Alright, so we're at the finish line now. I've roasted up the root vegetables here, the turnip and the carrots, and root vegetables in, and that'll pretty much complete the stew. I like a lot. You don't have to add as many, but I like lots of roots. And you can add anything you like in there, you know. You could have celery root or beets, whatever you like in your stew. Let's give that a stir, see how we turned out here. Wow, it's looking pretty hearty. Big chunks of beef, lots of vegetables, nice big rich sauce. If you have some red wine, you could add a little red wine in there. Basically, that's just Irish stew, as I make it. Sometimes I like to add corn, but my family likes peas. You can leave the peas out if you don't like peas. You can just go the root vegetables and potatoes. Sweet potatoes in there is nice. So, there you go, guys. That is how Redbeard makes his Irish stew. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Bon appetit.